welcome to the Standing Committee on Privileges, Elections, Standing Orders and Printing. I am Mark Smith, the MLA for Drayton Valley Devon and Chair of the committee. I would ask the members and those joining the committee at the table to introduce themselves for the record. We'll start to my right.
Good morning, Roger Reid, MLA for Livingston McLeod and Deputy Chair.
Jason Stefan, MLA for Red Deer South.
Jackie Armstrong-Hominiuk, MLA for Saskatchewan-Bakerville.
Dan Williams, MLA for Peace River constituency.
Good morning, Leela here, Chestermere Strathmore.
Good morning, Jasbir Diol, MLA for Edmonton Meadows.
Good morning, Shannon Dean, Clerk of the Assembly.
Good morning, Nancy Robert, Clerk of Journals and Committees.
Good morning, Philip Asseline, Clerk Assistant and Director of House Services.
Good morning, Aaron Roth, Committee Clerk.
Thank you. Honourable members, Section 6 of the Legislative Assembly Act authorizes members of the committees of the Legislative Assembly to participate by teleconference or other methods of communication if unanimous consent is granted. As members are aware, the committee rooms are equipped to facilitate meeting participation by teleconference and video conference. For members to participate at this meeting using one of these methods, the committee either must pass a motion unanimously to allow for teleconferencing and video conferencing today, or members may instead pass a motion to approve attendance by teleconference or video conference for the duration of the committee's mandate. This would not preclude the committee from determining that members' attendance in person at specific committee meetings is required. Do members have any questions about this issue? Would there be a member willing to move a motion to authorize participation by teleconference or video conference? Okay, you see Member Hominiuk. Yeah, I'll read out the draft motion here. Moved by that the duration of the 30th Legislature, the Standing Committee on Privileges and Elections, Standing Orders and Printing pursuant to Section 6 of the Legislative Act permit committee members and invited guests to participate in committee meetings by teleconference or video conference, subject to the provision that the committee may require members' attendance in person at a particular meeting upon passage at a previous meeting of a motion to that effect. I believe Member Hominiuk, Armstrong-Hominiuk, is prepared to put that motion forward. So as this motion requires unanimous consent, I will ask only if there is anyone opposed to this motion. So is there anyone opposed to this motion? Thank you. The motion is carried. I would invite those members joining the meeting via Microsoft Teams to now introduce themselves. So let's start with...
Good morning, Kathleen Denley, MLA from
Mr. Gottfried.
Richard Gottfried, MLA, Calgary Fish Creek.
Mr. Loyola.
Rod Loyola, MLA for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Ms. Renault.
Marie Renault, St. Albert.
And Mr. Barnes.
Drew Barnes, MLA, Cypress Medicine Hat. Thank you.
Is there anyone else on that we're not aware of? Okay. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Those participating by video conference are asked to please turn on your camera while speaking and to mute your microphone when not speaking. Members participating virtually who wish to be placed on a speakers list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please signal to the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent during the duration of this meeting. So, would a member move adoption of our meeting agenda?
So moved.
Okay. Moved by Mr. Reid that the agenda for the May 31st, 2022 meeting of the Standing Committee on Privileges, Elections, Standing Orders, and Printing be adopted as circulated. All those in favor in the room?
Aye.
Oh, do we have to do? Okay, yeah, we should probably look at discussion first. I'm sorry. Rookie mistakes. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor in the room?
Aye.
All of those in favor, or any against? In favor virtually?
Aye.
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 Any against? I call that carried. We're going to review Standing Order 29.1 on interventions. Oh, I'm sorry, that's right. Okay, that's right here. Honorable members, before we begin this meeting, I would like to briefly review the mandate of the committee. The Standing Committee on Privileges and Elections Standing Orders and Printing is established by Standing Order 52-1 sub A. The committee is mandated to meet only when a matter has been referred to it by the Assembly, such as the matter of interventions, which we will be discussing today. Therefore, unlike other committees of the legislature, this committee is not mandated to generate its own work. Are there any questions about the committee's mandate? Maybe before we move on, we should recognize that MLA Newdorf is here. Mr. Newdorf, maybe you could introduce yourself to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Nathan Newdorf, MLA for Lethbridge East.
Thank you for joining us today. Honorable members, on June the 7th, 2021, the Assembly agreed to motion other than a government motion 518 as amended. As members are aware, with the passage of this motion, the 5-minute question and comment period under Standing Order 29.2 that was available following speeches on government business was struck out, and in its place is the new Standing Order 29.1, which allows members to make short interventions during members' speeches in debate on government bills and motions and private bills with the permission of the member speaking. In accordance with Motion 518, the new interventions rule came into effect on the first day of the fall sitting in 2021, which was October 25th, 2021. Part B of Motion 518 directed the Standing Committee on Privileges and Elections, Standing Orders and Printing to conduct a review of the interventions rule. The motion, as amended, directed that the review commence within a year of Standing Order 29.1 coming into effect, and that the committee table a report to the Assembly in relation to this review, which may include any amendments recommended by the committee within 1 year after the committee commences its review. Do members have any questions or comments about the mandate of this review before we proceed? Seeing none, hearing none. As we begin our review, I would like to call upon Nancy Robert, Clerk of Journals and Committees, to provide an overview of what supports the committee has available to it as we proceed. Ms. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning again, everyone. So for this committee's review, obviously, you're reviewing a rule of the Assembly, and so I would say in this case, the stakeholders are the members of the Assembly, members of this committee, and all the other members of the Assembly. And so that being the case, the committee may wish to seek input from the stakeholders, from the members. And so it's possible that the committee may wish to perhaps survey members on what they think of the interventions rule and any recommendations for change they might have for it. If that's the case, the Legislative Assembly Office could certainly provide a summary of any information gleaned from the survey and report back to the committee on that information. As members may know, Alberta is the only Canadian jurisdiction that employs an interventions rule in their assembly. This rule I believe, was based on the rule, the interventions rule in the UK Parliament. And so when committees are doing reviews of matters, research services will often do cross-jurisdictional work to provide to the committee. In this case, perhaps work could be done to provide a comparison of the UK rule versus the Alberta rule with respect to interventions. And then, of course, the Legislative Assembly Office could also help and would typically help the committee in drafting its final report with recommendations back to the Assembly. So just some ideas of some of the things that the LAO could do to assist the committee with its review.
Okay. Are there any questions for Ms. Robert? So we've been called to go through the interventions and to look at interventions as a committee and to make recommendations to the legislature. The LAO and Ms. Robert are open to providing us with services to help us in making those recommendations. Honourable members, as we've now reviewed the mandate of the committee and have a sense of what supports are available to the committee, I would now like to open the floor to any comments or motions as to how the committee would like to proceed. We stand open. Mr. Stefan.
Sure, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move that the Standing Committee on Privileges and Elections, Standing Orders and Printing request research services to compile a cross-jurisdictional analysis on the use of interventions in Westminster-based parliamentary systems for submission to the committee.
We'll give them time to write that out and put it on the screen. Could you read that motion again, please?
Sure. I'd like to move that the Standing Committee on Privileges and Elections, Standing Orders and Printing request research services to compile a cross-jurisdictional analysis on the use of interventions in Westminster-based parliamentary systems for submission to the committee.
Yeah, we'll put it up on the screen. We'll see if it captures what you said. Moved by Mr. Stefan that the PSOP committee request that the research services compile a cross-jurisdictional analysis on the use of interventions in Westminster parliamentary-based systems for submission to the committee. Does that represent what you said?
Looks great.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion that is before us? Okay. Mrs. Zahir.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, in our discussions and with respect to the survey that will be done or the cross-jurisdictional check, are we going to also be looking into, I suppose, I've really enjoyed the interventions. I thought that it's brought a lot of interesting conversation into the legislature. I'm just curious about convention around interventions with respect to having to take an intervention, or there was discussions around people being able to finish their thoughts before an intervention can come in. Just I suppose the quality of how it is that we intervene to make sure that the conversations flow as they should.
Is that directed to?
Just as a discussion point, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
And just in respect to how we'll be asking the questions for the cross-jurisdictional, as we look and scope and find out, I think it might be interesting to have maybe to even look at the Hansard of other Westminster models that use this to see what kind of what's the polite and, or, you know, there's probably ways we can improve the interventions that we've done. So I'm just as curious about that as well too, to how we can improve our interventions.
Okay, can we direct research services through this motion to do something like that? I'm not sure how that works. Do we? Go ahead. Ms. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the discussion that's being held with respect to this motion will be taken into consideration when Research Services or Committee Services undertakes the task.
Okay, so we can make sure that that's a part of their research. Okay.
That's great stuff. Thank you.
And I believe Member Ganley?
Pardon me, yes. I mean, I don't strongly oppose this. I feel like my understanding was the member who proposed it had sort of done a cross-jurisdictional in advance of proposing it. It seemed like the Assembly was generally supportive of it. I'll admit to having been a bit skeptical, but I think it's worked fine. So I feel like maybe we don't need to like over process this, but that's just my comments.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Deal?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm pretty much of the same view as Ms. Ganley has said. You know, I was under the impression that there has been quite a bit of work done before these proposals were brought in. So if we are just going back to the same place where we started it, then probably this seems unnecessary to do it. But if we're trying to do something different than the work we have done before bringing these proposals, and that's a different story. In my view, I think there would have been thorough process to do cross-jurisdictional analysis before bringing these proposals in. And I also wanted to see, similarly, it was quite, you know, didn't know which way it was going to do. We were thinking it's going to impact the speaking time of the members, but definitely it has, you know, provided slightly better improvement on building a relationship between members and the way the communication, better communication, and it worked. So we have the committee wanted to do the survey. We have the tools. The caucus can do the surveys with their members, and they can bring back the feedbacks. Then LU can speak to the independent members the other ways. But if the member really knows something he's proposing other than what has already been done, then that's a different story.
Mr. Stefan.
Sorry, I wouldn't mind just speaking. So the purpose of the motion is not only to identify the jurisdictions that use the practice of interventions, but perhaps there are nuances that they've developed in terms of best practices. Perhaps there's things that the committee could discover from those other jurisdictions through experience, nuances in terms of how they go about the practice of interventions that we could consider. So that's where I think that there could be some value from a cross-jurisdictional analysis, is looking at the nuances of how interventions are used.
Thank you, member. Is there anybody else on the? Mr. Williams?
Thank you. As the member that proposed it, happily, and I'm glad to see a lot of interest in it now. I'll take credit for having the no meat committee get a little less vegan and a little more meat on it for the first time in many years. I'm very proud of that fact. But I think that there could be some value, and I appreciate Member Ganley and Dale's position that we shouldn't just rehash what we already know. Let's get to surveys. I think that's substantively very helpful. But I mean, there are things that I think aren't going perfectly smoothly with interventions in my own impression. The mechanics of how to recognize someone, sometimes it might be a cultural thing. It could be something that we could ask to come back in this cross-jurisdictional report to us. How do other jurisdictions, the UK, recognize members when geographically speaking, you can't see them stand up, right? How does that work smoothly? I think sometimes Declining intervention is something that we don't do as smoothly as perhaps we could in the chamber. So I've noticed sometimes I'll stand up hoping to intervene, and then I stand there, and I'd be very happy to sit down if I was waved off or told I'm not accepting intervention right now. But it kind of ends up stalling out. So maybe there are those nuances if we plan on keeping it, or at least we're open to keeping it, to see how we could refine it to serve even better. Because I agree, I think it's done some good for substantive conversation and debate in the chamber, but I still think it could be improved upon. And that might be a cultural thing of how we as a chamber react to the standing order. It's very new. The UK has had this for decades and decades, so maybe it'll take time. But I'm hoping this conversation can inform our research team and the LAO office on exactly what kind of questions we have, and then that might help them in what they're going to bring back. Bring back to us. So those are my thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any other member that would like to speak to the motion at hand? Online? Then let's call the question. We'll start with members that are in the room. All those in favor of the motion, I suppose we should read it first. Moved by Mr. Stefan that PSOP request the research services compile a cross-jurisdictional analysis on the use of interventions in the Westminster parliamentary-based systems for submission to the committee. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those in the room, I'm sorry, all those online in favor?
Aye.
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 All those in the room against? Online, against? That motion is carried. Are there any other motions or discussion that we would have on today's? Mr. Newdorf.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that the Standing Committee on Privileges and Elections, Standing Orders and Printing request research services to conduct a survey of members of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta for suggestions for improving the intervention system as currently outlined in Standing Order 29.1.
Okay, we're going to give Aaron some time, and you may have to read that again
No
a
problem.
little more slowly.
To move that the Standing Committee conduct a survey of members of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta for suggestions for improving the intervention system as currently outlined in Standing Order 29.1. Do you need it one more time? Mr. Chair, if I might provide
Yes.
some rationale? Thank you.
Is this what you were looking for? Moved by Mr. Newdorf that PSOP conduct a survey of members of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta for suggestions on improving the interventions rule as outlined in Standing Order 29.1.
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay, go ahead, speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are some, I think there's some very engaged and practical individuals within the legislative assemblies on all sides of the House. And I look forward to seeing what they would say to provide some of that input for what works here. As Member Williams stated earlier, sometimes it's about culture or the society in which we live, and I think we are that culture and society at this time. I know I have two ideas that I'd like Council to hear that they could take forward and use maybe as a conversation starter with other members. I'm willing just to put these as soft asks, but I would like to see there be consideration of requiring members to accept interventions by people other than their own party. I think that would move towards increasing the level of debate, particularly if it's brought forward. 29(2)A used to do that. There was no option to decline that speaking time. It was set out in convention, and some of that has been lost. Whether it's the first intervention must be received, or all three, or two of the three, I would just like that to be one of the considerations. The second being that unless, maybe it works in tandem, maybe it works separately, unless you receive an intervention from an opposing member or an independent member or someone from not from your party, your time for speaking is not actually extended as that. Could also motivate the reception of interventions by someone other than from your own party. Those are just two very soft considerations, and I use that as examples to argue the motion put forward, that I think there could be many other positive suggestions that could work with the intent of Member Williams when he brought this forward, and I will leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I believe Ms. Ganley. Mr.
Yes,
Deal.
Sorry.
It's
So
Ms.
many
Ganley.
buttons. I can only see the motion. I can't see the room. So it's an interesting camera angle. So my thoughts were just these. Specifically, sort of like, what do we intend to send out? Like, are we looking at a multiple choice survey? Are we just going to like send sort of a general question that asks, you know, what are your thoughts on this? Are we going to allow people you know, if our caucus chooses to submit sort of all as one, are we going to allow that to happen? I mean, my view is that the best way to move forward is just sort of with an open-ended question, because I think, like, if we just ask, like, how do you think it's working? Do you have any suggestions for changes? I think that's the best way to get like a natural response from the membership. I think if we start asking specific questions about like, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that, it's going to prompt certain responses that maybe there's a technical term for that, when you like ask one general question and then ask a specific question about one thing, where it sort of like prompts a response to that one thing and you kind of lose the nuance of everything else. But I'm a little concerned about just asking one general question and then asking a specific question about sort of requiring someone to take an intervention, because then like you're speaking, someone can jump up in like literally the middle of your thought and cut you off and totally kind of derail you and ask a completely random question. I mean, personally, I think I've only ever declined one intervention, and it was for exactly that reason, that I was like clearly literally mid-thought and they were just trying to kind of derail what I was saying. So yeah, I think we should make a decision on whether we just want to ask a general question and get a general response. And if we don't want to do that, if we want to ask like a series of very specific questions, I think in that case, it would sort of have to come back here for us to kind of look at the survey and look at what's being asked and consider whether that's, you know, going to prompt a response on some aspects, but not other aspects. Personally, I think it's much better just to ask the general question. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I believe Mr. Williams wanted to, or no, Mr. Deal, okay.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, very brief comments on this. You know, I agree with the mandates of this motion, and I do support it, but no amendments, but I had some suggestions in my mind. So going forward, if that helps make the work of the committee and the LAO a bit easier. So if you could include the word to work with the caucus, that would probably provide help. Where the members have opportunity to debate over these things with their caucus, and probably the caucus can help the speed up the process or work better way. Other than that, I have no question at it, but I think the caucus can also play some role in this, providing the feedback in speed base or better way or help doing this.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would agree with Member Ganley's comments that it should be a general question. I think that really is the intent that my colleague was trying to put forward. A general question, leave it open. Don't try and elicit certain responses. I think that we should be pretty sincere in wanting to hear where members are coming from on it. And I'm sure there will be a slew of very, very thoughtful suggestions. I will say that if we do that, which is, I think, the better option, we will then have the task as the committee of trying to categorize these, interpret maybe what they're trying to get at. Obviously, we can't recommend by committee of 87. That would be a very difficult thing for us to do. So we're going to have to interpret, in a sense, what folks are saying, get a gist of their concerns, and see if maybe they suggested X, but Y gets the same point done and solve some other problems. So I just want to make sure that members going into this understand that we'll have that job to do afterwards of trying to make sense of what are probably multiple suggestions from many, many members. So, but I would agree that I think that's smart, and I think that Member Neudorf's suggestion was just to give an example of the kind of thing he would like to put forward when he's asked the question in the survey.
Just before we get to you, Mr. Deal, we could go to Ms. Robert or to Dr. Mazelin here and see if you have an understanding of what we're looking for in the survey and how you think you might be able to put it together, if we pass this motion.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think we have an understanding of what the committee is looking for. I wonder, since you've given me this opening, if I might suggest that the committee might wish to see a draft survey before it's sent out and have it approved. And I don't know how you'd want to accomplish that. Perhaps you may wish to amend the motion to allow for something like that, but I'll just leave that with you. Thanks.
Okay, the committee's been given a suggestion. So, Mr. Neudorf, you can think about that while I go to Mr. Deol, and then if you want to make an amendment to the motion, that would be fine. Oh, yes. Somebody else will have to move the amendment, so maybe someone else in the room can be thinking about how they would like to amend that to reflect that suggestion. Mr. Deol.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, once again. Just wanted a little bit more clarity, as I had a suggestion. Probably I can come up with some better wording on this. As it says, this question is about suggesting on improving the intervention rules as outlined in Standing Order 29.1. So it means like we are not questioning the rule of interventions at all. We are just getting the feedback around as it is, and regardless of the feedback, the intervention is going to remain. So this is the question of this? Okay.
Hey, do we have someone that's prepared to make a motion, or should I present perhaps a draft? Could we make up a draft? Mr. Neudorf?
Chair, just for clarification, sorry, with that motion, I don't think that we have to prescribe necessarily how the Parliamentary Council comes back to the committee. I'd like to leave the motion as it is and then allow them to post the draft on the internal website, and then committee members could be polled as to whether they approve it. I don't know if that would be simpler, rather than changing the motion, just to have that information flow through the internal committee website as it could be used.
We're going to have to ask if that's a good way of doing it. Personally, I'm wondering if we should be looking at that, because if we're going to have something going out to the members, I think it probably should have the approval of the committee, not just, well, I'd like to see this or I'd like to see that as feedback. I think that puts the research team in a difficult position. But maybe I can just get a recommendation on that. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. So in other circumstances where, like, say, for instance, a report is, a committee has agreed to draft a report. The report, part of the motion has traditionally said that the report be drafted and that the community have an opportunity to review the report and then with final approval, often, not always, but often by the chair and deputy chair. So there are mechanisms such as that possibly.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So then in that spirit, which is, again, the motion doesn't necessarily need to change, it goes to the chair and deputy chair, but should then the wording be moved by Mr. Newirth that PSOP draft a survey of members and then return it to the committee?
Can he change his motion?
So somebody would have to make an amendment.
Somebody is going to have to make an amendment to that effect. Can we have somebody? Mrs. Ayer?
Thank you. I would propose an amendment to the motion to suggest, and I apologize for my wording, I hope I get this right, that that Mr. Neudorf, that PSOF conduct a draft survey
Draft
of
a
the
survey?
members. Pardon me?
That the PSOP draft a survey?
Draft a survey or conduct a draft, draft a survey that they conduct to the members of the Legislative Assembly. And then do we also have to put in there, sorry, Mr. Chair, that we return to this committee to approve the survey?
Okay, we'll let Aaron
Okay.
draft those thoughts and put them all together, and as soon as he has them up, then we'll go
Thank you.
straight to you, Mr. Deal. No, just wait. We'll let him put it up on the screen first, please. It always helps to be able to see what we're talking about before we start talking about it.
Directly through services to draft a survey.
Yeah.
Approval by the committee.
So maybe can we suggest rather than amending?
Made that we do this. Mr. Neudorf, if you would be so kind as to rescind your motion, and then we'll put forward a draft motion that we've already got made up, and then we can discuss that, okay? Okay.
So he needs consent of the committee to do that.
Okay. Mr. Neudorf has requested to withdraw the motion. We're going to have to ask the committee for consent on that. So all in favor of rescinding Mr. Neudorf's motion in the room, all in favor of rescinding? Okay. All against in the room? All in favor of rescinding the motion online?
Aye.
Aye.
All against online? The motion is carried, and that motion is now rescinded.
I'm
Withdrawn.
really sorry. I'm just wondering if whoever has the camera, if you could just zoom it out a little bit, because we can just only see the middle of the motion from online.
Chat screen for everybody.
Okay, Mr. Roth will put it on the chat screen. If, for those of you online need to be able to see the whole motion, you can go to the chat.
I have some proposed.
Okay, we have some proposed language here for a motion. It reads, moved by Mr. Neudorf that the Standing Committee on Privileges, Elections, Standing Orders, and Printing direct committee services to prepare a draft survey to invite feedback from members of the Legislative Assembly on the Interventions Rules Standing Order 29.1 as part of the committee review to be approved by the draft survey. Well, I'm not sure what's happening today, but Mr. Neudorf.
I'm okay with this.
Any other discussion? Just 1 second, please.
Can we recess for a couple minutes because some of the members have lost their audio to participate?
Okay, we've been asked if we could recess for a few minutes because some of the people have online have lost their audio, And so we're going to do some work on this. So recess for what, 5 minutes? Okay, so we'll return at 1:45. Thank you. This is recess.
Yeah.
privileges, elections, standing orders, and printing direct committee services to prepare a draft survey to invite feedback from members of the Legislative Assembly on the Interventions Rule Standing Order 29.1 as part of the committee's review, to be approved by the chair after committee members have had an opportunity to review the draft survey. So as I read that, we're asking them to put together a survey. It's going to be going back to the committee. If you have feedback on that survey, it's directed towards me. Once we've approved, once I approve the survey, then it would be sent out to the members of the Assembly. We'll need a motion, Mr. Newdorf.
Moved.
Okay, and I believe, Mr. Williams, you were cut off there before we recessed. Did you have any comments?
No, only to make the point that some members had lost audio.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other comments or questions before we vote on this motion? In the room? Online? Okay, I'm calling the question. All those in favor of the motion as it reads? All in favor in this room, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against in this room, please say no. All those in favor online, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against online, please say no. That motion is carried. Now, it's been suggested to me that we should probably have another motion that comes right after this. So we'll put that motion up and then we'll read through it, and then if somebody would like to put forward that motion, put their name to it, that would be great. So moved by that the Standing Committee on Privileges, Elections, Standing Orders, and Printing direct the committee clerk to distribute the survey pertaining to the interventions rule of all members of the Legislative Assembly with a submission deadline of June the 10th, 2022, and direct research services to compile the results of the survey for the committee. Is there anyone that would be prepared to put that motion forward? Mrs. Ahir would be prepared to put that motion forward. Discussion?
Hello, Mr. Chair. This is Rod Loyola.
Yes, Mr. Loyola, go right ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'll turn my camera on here so you can see me as well. I'm just, June 10th seems like a pretty quick turnaround. I'm wondering why that date is chosen. Like, could we not give ourselves a little bit more time so that people could reflect on it a bit more and maybe extend that?
Okay, I guess to a certain degree that's going to be dependent on research services, or is it? Well, can you work, first I guess the question I would have for research services, can you work within that deadline? Yep, go right ahead.
I'll speak to that, Mr. Chair, and I think it's just a matter for the committee to consider is just simply the time in which MLAs would need to respond to the survey, and once the survey results are in, that's when research services would do its work. So it wouldn't involve research services at this point. So you've got two elements. You've got the drafting of the survey, I guess, and I can tell you that we've got something pretty close to being distributed to the committee. And then the committee has to approve it, and then the chair ultimately, you have to approve it yourself. Then it would have to be distributed to members for their feedback, all within this time frame.
Okay, Mrs. Ahir?
I would agree with Member Loyola that it might be worthwhile giving a little bit more time. Do we have any suggestions in discussion, maybe like the end of June, if that's suitable to all members?
Mr. Dale?
Yeah, similarly, I was thinking, the session has just ended and the number of members probably not be around, and, after 2 years of the situation we were in, and timeline seems a bit tight, and if we can work on that, probably give some more time for the members to look at it and provide their thorough feedback. That would probably help both ways to do better work.
Any other discussion? Mr. Newdorf?
Mr. Chair, just for clarity, I would like to propose the date of June 30th, 2022.
Okay, so you're making an amendment?
I would like to make a friendly amendment, yes.
Okay. June the 30th? No, do we need to vote on a friendly amendment? Yeah, all amendments need to vote. Okay. Are we ready? Give us another second or two here. We're good? Okay. So Mr. Newdorf has moved that the motion be amended by striking out June the 10th, 2022 and substituting June 30th, 2022. Discussion? Mr. Newdorf?
Mr. Chair, I just, I agree with Member Loyola and MLA Diol and of course Honorable Madam here. So I just put that forward as a starting point. I'd love to hear if anybody has a problem with that, but I think that extension of 20 days, almost 3 weeks, and it's still good to get it done before summer, because I think if we dispense for summer, the traditional holidays, July and August, it might not be fresh in people's minds, and then it would be difficult to have those recommendations in place prior to the fall session, which I think is the intent, is to get this review done, allow the appropriate amount of time, whatever that might be, make those changes so that in the fall session, if they are adopted, they could be instilled in good time. That's my rationale for choosing that date. Happy to hear concerns or other suggestions.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion as on the amendment? Mrs. Ganley?
Yeah, my question was just, I mean, I think that the June 30th timeline is fine, but I don't, my understanding was we had like an entire year to commit to do the reviews. So I don't see that we necessarily need to have it in before the fall sitting. Am I confused?
Yeah, no, we do have a year to complete, but I think probably what Mr. Newdorf was suggesting is that it would be nice to have it done and ready before we sit again in the fall. Mrs. Ahir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I also think too, like we're fresh off of a session where the interventions are also, right there. I think that our ability to process and understand information right now will be great. And I would love to see us be able to go into the next session with, whatever improvements that we see necessary. I'm really actually looking forward to seeing how folks respond to this survey. So I think the sooner we can get it done, the better. Thank you.
Any other discussion, questions? Hearing none, then I will call the amendment. Moved by Mr. Newdorf that the motion be amended by striking out June the 10th, 2022 and substituting June 30th, 2022. All in favor of the room, please say aye.
Aye.
All against in the room, please say no. All in favor online, please say aye.
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 All against online, please say no. That amendment is passed. We are back on the motion as amended. Any discussion? Okay, let's call the vote. Moved by Honorable Ahir, Member Ahir, that the Standing Committee on Privileges, Elections, Standing Orders, and Printing direct the committee clerk to distribute the survey pertaining to the interventions rule to all members of the Legislative Assembly with the submission deadline of June the 30th, 2022, and direct research services to compile the results of the survey for the committee. Any discussion on the motion as amended? Okay, all in favor in the room, please say aye.
Sorry.
Oh, was there somebody?
I think Member Ganley had a comment.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Member Ganley, did you have a comment on the motion as amended?
No, I already made it. It was on the amendment.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we're back to the motion as amended. All in favor in the room, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody against in the room, please say no. Anyone online in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Anyone against the motion online, please say no. That motion as amended is carried. Are there any other comments, discussion, questions, or motions that this committee needs to consider? None? Okay. Then on our agenda, I believe we are at other business. Do members have any other business that they wish to bring forward, realizing that the scope of this committee is directed by the legislature? None? Okay, the date of the next meeting will be at the call of the chair, and I adjourn this meeting. Oh no, would a member like to move to a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
So moved. All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
In the room or online?
Aye.
Anyone against? We are adjourned.